Okay, guys, hopefully you're staying healthy. We're almost done. We're on chapter 20, and it is about equal opportunity. Some of the things we're going to talk about in this chapter are the 14th Amendment and how that protects people, and how America has changed over the years, how certain people have been given rights that were denied to them. Okay, guys, stay healthy. Okay, guys, this is probably going to be the last chapter we get to, so let's take a look at chapter 20, the right to equal opportunity. So, first, let's look at the vocabulary words. Equal protection means receiving the same treatment by the law as everyone else. Equal opportunity means receiving the same chance as everyone else. Due process is the way the laws are carried out. So that means when all the steps of the laws happen. So if you get charged with a crime and you don't get to have a trial and defend yourself, you didn't get your due process. Discrimination is the act of treating somebody unfairly. Okay, so let's take a look. One day in December 1955, a woman in Alabama stood in line waiting for a bus. Finally, the bus came. She got on the bus, paid for her ticket, and took a seat that was available. So what happened is there ended up being a conflict between her and one of the riders and a driver. And the way I heard the story is that she got on the bus, paid for her ticket, and was sitting in the first seat in the section she was supposed to sit in by the law. So then the bus became crowded, and when a white person needed a space to sit, they told her to give up her seat. She refused to give up her seat because she had paid for that ticket. She had earned the right to sit there, and she wasn't going to be pushed out of her place just because somebody else needed a space to sit. So this woman, Rosa Parks, refuses to give up her seat. At that time, there was a law in Montgomery, Alabama that says that black citizens are only allowed to sit in the back of the bus. So she refused to give up her seat. She had paid for it, and what happens is she ends up getting arrested. She refuses to give her seat up. So she was tired of giving into racism. She ends up taking her case to court and fighting the charges. So when she goes to court, they find her guilty. She loses her case. So she asks for an appeal, which is a second look at her case. And eventually, it gets all the way to the Supreme Court. So after they look at her case, over a year later, they overturn her conviction. And that means they throw out the previous verdict. The court decided that Rosa Parks had as much right to sit there as anybody else. She was riding on a public bus. That's the key word. And the city's laws were unconstitutional. And if you guys remember, nothing is allowed to violate the Constitution. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection under the laws. And this law did not favor African American citizens. It actually it favored white people. So that law, since it favored one group of people and discriminated against another, was found to be unconstitutional. She had the right to equal protection and equal opportunity. So the Constitution does not specifically mention equal opportunity, but it does mention due process, which is fair treatment under the law and guaranteeing all of the steps. So a trial and everything that entails with that. You must always be given all of your constitutional rights. Equal protection means the law must treat all people alike. So this gets confused a lot. With equal protection, it means that two people who are committing a similar crime should face similar punishment. But that's not always what happens. There's lots of things that can go into it. If two people have vastly different crime records and one of them has a history of being a criminal, they might not get the same treatment. But if they have the same starting line, they have a same background and same record, they should be treated similarly or the same. It is illegal to treat people unfairly because of their race, religion, sex, age, or background. So people are often victims of discrimination, and discrimination is when you treat somebody unfairly based on their race, religion, sex, age, multiple different things. So if you look at American history, there's a big history of discrimination happening to multiple different people. African Americans have been discriminated against for a long time. We had the whole Civil War over slavery, and that is the most extreme example of discrimination. So if you look through American history, you can find examples of almost anybody being discriminated against. So different time and different scenarios, every person or every group of people has faced some type of discrimination. Some are far worse than others, though. The 14th Amendment states that the states are not allowed to deny people their constitutional rights. It also says that state and local laws must protect those rights. Federal laws such as the Civil Rights Act have been passed to prohibit discrimination. These acts make discrimination in housing, education, and jobs against the law. And state laws are supposed to support the federal laws. So laws do not say that everybody must be treated exactly the same, but they do say that everybody must be treated fairly. So treating everybody the same would not necessarily be fair. So let's say that you guys are sitting in class and it's time for a test, and a new student shows up who is blind. If I handed every single student the exact same test, that would be equal, but it would not be fair. So the laws say you have to treat people fairly. So on the opposite side of that, let's say someone who is deaf, they can't hear anything, is applying for a job answering phone calls for a company. That company does not have to hire that person because they'd be unable to do the job. But if it's a job a person would be able to do with minimal modifications, they can't discriminate against them. So if you apply for a job stocking shelves at Walmart and you have one arm, if you're able to pick up the items and still put them on the shelves, it would be discrimination if they didn't hire you because you only have one arm. Those are examples of equal opportunity. So, what other aspects of life does equal opportunity face? When it comes to housing, there's been lots of discrimination, and it's not really the way things should be. Equal opportunity means everyone should have a fair chance at something. So if you look back in time in American history, there was periods when people would not sell their houses. It was usually white families would not sell their houses to black families. That would be discrimination. Since the Constitution only covered things done by the government, people who owned houses, it was their property, they were allowed to discriminate that way. So the Civil Rights Act is going to change things. Now that type of discrimination is against the law. You cannot refuse to rent or sell a house to someone because of their race, religion, sex. Now, if you were refusing to sell them a house because they don't have enough money, that's 100% legal. You're allowed to do that. There's also been discrimination when it comes to education. The 14th Amendment guarantees that everyone has an equal chance to succeed in school. So, at one time, especially following the Civil War, the schools were segregated. They had separate schools for white and black children. And those schools were supposed to be separate but equal, which means they should be the same quality. But that was never really the case. Usually, actually not usually, every single time, the black schools were far less equipped. They had older books, they didn't have the supplies they needed, and it was not an equal situation. So after some court cases, the Supreme Court decided that segregation was done, and they had to integrate or combine the public schools. Here you can see in Little Rock, Arkansas, the National Guard was called in to ensure the students' safety during school integration. Today, public schools must give all students an equal chance to get a good education, and that means making accommodations for certain students too. So if you have a student who is in a wheelchair, but they want to participate in the marching band, the school has to work with them to come up with some kind of accommodations that let them try the activity as well. You can't just keep people out of activities because of a disability. The school has to make an attempt to include them in everything. If a school gets caught discriminating, they can lose their federal funding. So there's also been discrimination when it comes to jobs. And this one is a lot harder to go after. So sometimes workers make less money than other workers even though they're doing the same work. And sometimes that's legal and sometimes it's illegal. Oftentimes women are victims of discrimination when it comes to jobs. And on average, they make less money than men, even when they're doing the exact same work, which is not fair. So imagine you're working at McDonald's, working at the cash register, and a boy next to you is making $2 more an hour just because he's a boy. That would be completely unfair. The 14th Amendment does some things to stop this type of discrimination, but it can only be used in jobs connected with the federal and state government. It has no direct influence over private businesses. So there's been a couple things passed to try to fix this. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 helped to solve some of these problems. Under these laws, any company that gets money from the government cannot discriminate or they can lose that funding. Many states also have laws that make types of discrimination illegal, but not every state does. So in 1972, women were fighting for equal opportunity, and they tried to get an amendment to the Constitution passed called the Equal Rights Amendment. So when an amendment is going to get passed, it's got to get passed by 2/3 of Congress and by 3/4 of the states. When it came time to vote, it was 3 states short of passing. So in 1973, a woman named Maureen Bullock was training to be a restaurant manager. She worked for a restaurant chain in Louisiana. She and a man were training for the same program. They received $450 a month. Later, they both became managers for that same exact company. She got a raise to $600 a month, and he got a raise to $750 a month. 3 months later, they each got another raise. Now she's at $720, and he's at $800. She thought this was not fair because she was being paid less because she was a woman. So she decided to take her case to court. When she went to court, the restaurant chain fired her. So they thought, if you're going to sue us, we're going to fire you. So her case went to court, and she showed that her job required the same skills and the same responsibilities as the man who was getting paid more money than her. She wanted the same pay because she was doing the exact same work. The restaurant chain pointed out that good managers had to be leaders, and it said that Maureen Bullock was a woman, so she could not be as good of a leader as a man. The restaurant said they had to pay her less because she wasn't as good at the job as he was. So the court has to decide who's correct, and they find out that the restaurant had discriminated against her because of her sex. They pointed out that she had done just as well, if not better, than the man who they were paying more. So the court ordered the restaurant chain to pay her all of the money they would have owed her, as if they were paying her the same wages as the man. The court also decided that they had no legal rights to fire her, and they had to give her job back if she wanted for it. Okay, guys, so go online into Google Classroom, knock out the last worksheet because we're almost done. Stay healthy, and I'll see you guys soon.